The engine is still stopped.
For launch. GC, go. Guidance, go. Fido, go. Prop, go. GNC, go. Max, go. Eagle, go. Ecom,
go. Pending final steps. The cabin leak check.
3, 2, 1.
Is there anyone here that would like to communicate with us? Can you give us a sign?
Welcome to the Riff Nation Network, the RNN, putting a slide in your glide and a dip in your hip. Welcome to the mothership, the home of the travelers of the universe. With shows throughout the week, you can find us at Instagram, Twitch, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, and more. Everything you could want, everything you can need right here, right now. From the paranormal to the supernatural. From comedy to the spiritual. And now, your featured show. Shall we begin?
It's showtime, folks!
Podcast may contain material that some listeners may find sensitive, offensive, or disturbing. We strive to create respectful and informative content, but topics discussed may include mature themes such as violence, explicit language, or controversial subjects, triggering content including discussions related to mental health, trauma, or other sensitive issues, explicit language. Occasionally, our guests or hosts may use strong language. While we aim to handle these topics with care and empathy, we encourage listeners to exercise discretion. If you find any content distressing, consider skipping or seeking support. Remember that this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice. If you need assistance, please consult a qualified expert.
Welcome to the Forgotten Library. Where the books whisper, the shadows listen, and the stories refuse to stay quietly on the shelf. I'm your host, Christina Spencer. And each month, we explore one novel together. With 3 one-hour live episodes of immersive, read-aloud chapters. Followed by a live interview with the author who brought the story to life. So find your favorite comfy chair, a soft blanket, and a hot beverage. Light a candle if the darkness scares you. And settle in for story time. Welcome to this week's live episode of Horror, History, and Hauntings Library.
Hello, all my creepy little weirdos out there. Want to say hi. Just a few things, just to let you know the show is live. I am here. I'll be in the lower corner the whole time if you want to chat in the chat section. But just to make the reading a little bit more relaxing, I kind of do it ahead of time. But and I'm not going to stop the recording until the end. So I can still talk to you, but it will be in the chat. All right, guys. So let's get started with the story tonight. I hope you enjoy. Let me get it brought up here. There we go. Let me drop me down here. And I hope you guys enjoy.
Paranormal, My Chosen Journey by Ernie Atwell. Chapter 3. They Saw the Priest. My grandfather Ernie was retired from a milk company, or in those days what they called the dairy. Even though he was retired, my grandfather was not yet ready to give up working. He felt that his place was in the work world, and continued to do so until his late 70s or early 80s. Grandpa Ernie worked at our church and what would eventually become my elementary school, just across the parking lot from our church. He worked in maintenance along with two other elderly church parishioners, Mr. Eddie and Mr. Don, and the three of them made the perfect team. All three had nicknames they called each other when the other two weren't around, and all three complained about the other two once they all arrived home. It was no harm intended, but seemed to be an opening topic every day at 5 p.m. at the supper table. My grandfather would ramble on telling stories, mostly all being funny, of their adventures throughout the day in the world of maintenance and repairs at the Catholic church and school. The funny thing now that I think back, he spoke of many people, some that I never met, yet alone never even saw, only pictured in the now memories in my head of the stories that Grandpop shared over the years. Like a stereotypical gangster movie, everyone in my grandfather's life had a nickname, including all our neighbors. I guess in today's society that would be deemed offensive, but back in those days, that's just how people, friends, referenced one another. At age 11, my mother, brother, and myself went to live with my grandparents and my father with his mother on a temporary basis as a result of our landlord selling the house we rented, leaving us no other choice as of a 30-day notice. To be quite honest, I really didn't mind at all. Being so close to my grandparents and my Aunt Thelma, who also lived there, and was mine and Eric's babysitter since our now sold house was in the same block. Being a boy at age 11, I was living the dream. I loved my grandparents' home. Everything was neat and organized, and there were religious pictures and statues around, but what I loved most was the overwhelming sense of home and loving feeling I felt whenever I entered. I knew and felt deep inside this is where I belong, and did not want to think of a day that I would have to leave. Yes, we lived just up the street, and I generally saw my grandmom and grandpop every day. But there was something inside me, a feeling of love that instructed my heart that assured me that this is my new home now. My parents continued on what their daily lives and all along was searching for a new place to start over and call home. Eventually, after about 4 months, my father informed my mother that he found a place to rent that she may be interested in looking into. I remember that day that my parents went to sign the agreement and get the moving process started. It was at this point I knew I had to somehow tell my mother, and I wanted to stay with my grandparents and Aunt Thelma. The very thought of leaving my grandparents' house and move the 30 minutes away was an aching in my heart that I never yet experienced at such a young age. It never once crossed my mind that my grandparents would suggest that I go with my parents because I felt a love from them that didn't require asking, because somehow in my mind I knew for sure that they didn't want me to leave either. The day finally arrived, and I had to tell my mother that I was not going with her and my father, and much as I anticipated, my grandparents stood by my side and agreed and backed every word I spoke. My mother said she had a feeling and she knew this was coming. Due to the circumstances at hand and me being somewhat nervous, and I guess you could say anxious child, she said she wasn't going to fight me over this, and I could stay with them for a brief period of time while they, along with my brother, settle into the new house. Now that I was living with my grandparents, I eventually left public schools and was accepted into a private Catholic school where my grandfather worked. And I was so excited for the new school year to begin, where I would be attending as a 7th grader. Along with the fascination for spirits and the afterlife, I was also so intrigued with Catholicism and could not wait to start this new adventure in my young life that was so much more than just attending an hour of Sunday school each week. Once I started and was settled in, I participated in as many school programs and activities that I could fit into my life. My grandparents supported this and helped me along the way in everything that I was involved in at that point. It was almost as if this is what they longed for, and I could tell that my grandfather was not just excited but very proud of me. When I attended public school, I went to Sunday school once a week and eventually became an altar boy. Now that I was a full-time student there, I continued as an altar boy, but now I had the opportunity to participate in many, many services other than the just one Sunday Mass a week. I joined the choir, the theater club, and also the youth group that met on Wednesday night, and much to my surprise, was ran by Father Mike. I even worked on Friday nights with my grandfather, cleaning up the church hall after Friday night bingo. I had an all-new life, headed in an all-new direction with all new friends. This was the happiest that I've ever been, and it just keeps getting better. During the school day, if there was a scheduled church event, such as a wedding or a funeral or a special mass, they would choose altar boys and we would leave class and serve the mass. A very excited event was happening at our church. There is a sacred statue of the Holy Virgin Mother Mary that is said to cry real tears. The holy artifact was currently traveling the world and was visiting various churches throughout the world, and we received notification that the Blessed Mother Mary statue would be coming to our church. The day arrived and everyone was excited to get to school and await this most holy and once-in-a-lifetime event. It was a cool, rainy spring morning, and the sky was dark and gray with a very misty and steady rain blanketing the entire community. We sat anxiously in class as Sister Charles taught us algebra. Normally, Sister Charles was very strict. Sit up straight, no fooling around, and keep your elbows off the desk. This is not how proper young men and women sit. On this particular day, Sister Charles kind of took it easy on us because I think deep inside she was just excited as we all were, and for a great reason. One of my classmates, who sat close to the window, glanced over to the front circular parking lot, and out of nowhere he yelled, "She's here!" I can remember without permission everyone exiting their seats and ran to the window, including Sister Charles, who stood behind the class and gazed out the window. It didn't take long for us to be ordered back to our desks, but in that brief moment we experienced something, in my opinion, was borderline miraculous and something that I remember as if it happened yesterday. There was a line of vehicles, almost resembling a presidential motorcade, that was entering the front parking lot of our school. Just as the shiny white limousine entered the circle and came to a rest to the front of the church, there was a break in the gray, misty, hovering clouds that out of from what appeared to be the heavens above. The sun was shining directly above the parking lot. We were in complete amazement, and at the same time had so much we wanted to say, yet could not say a word, because at that exact moment we realized we were in the presence of God. Some very distinguished-looking, well-dressed gentlemen exited the vehicle, and those wearing white gloves approached and opened the doors of the chariot of holiness. It seemed like an eternity, but in reality it must have been under a minute, and there she was, elegantly lifted and carried from the limousine. A symbol of holiness and unconditional love that we have only heard and read about, never expecting to see her in all her glory, let alone be in the same building with her. Disobeying all orders, this was our second trip to the classroom window, and we all stood in utter silence as we witnessed this artifact of absolute beauty and peace being ushered up the steps and out of view as Mother Mary entered our church. The next few days at church was unlike something we had ever seen before. There were special masses, priests and parishioners, and high-ranking Catholic clergy from all over coming to take part and pay homage to this most holy of symbols and what some called a life-changing event of Our Lady of Fatima Church. During the entire visit that the sacred Mother Mary statue was housed in our church, there was a sense of love and peace that cannot even be put into words but could only be felt in one's mind, body, and soul. It was a feeling of religion and everything that we grew up learning about, coming to life right before our very eyes and warming our hearts to the very core. The time had come, and this beautiful relic of religion and God's love had to depart and move on, leaving our church in the middle of the night. And when we returned to school that morning, the Blessed Virgin Mary was now a once memorable and cherished moment that was so good to be true that we still couldn't believe this event even occurred. The school year continued on through the spring, and all the after-school and evening events kept me so occupied that the summer crept up on us without warning. Earlier I mentioned that on Friday evenings I assisted my grandfather with cleaning the church hall after Friday night bingo. It was fun and something I look forward to each weekend. I got to stay up late and spend one-on-one time with my grandfather. Not to mention I made $40 to do it. However, the coolest part of the whole Friday night adventure was being the only two souls in the entire church building, or at least that's what I thought. There was always something that drew me to our church. I can't put my finger on it. Was it because I was participating in so many church events and I knew that my grandparents had a love and passion for the church, and now I was someone they could speak to proudly of? Or was it my own personal deep love for the religion? Not knowing the exact reason wasn't important. All I knew is I was there with something very spiritual yet mysterious that made me fall in love with everything involved. And I can honestly say, when involved in any of my church activities, I always felt a sense of constant peace that the non-Catholic world couldn't seem to provide. It was a typical summer evening, and we had just sat down at the supper table, anxious to get through my grandmother's home-cooked meal so that we could ascend to the living room and get ready to watch the baseball game. Just as we were finishing up and preparing for dessert, my grandfather said that he had to go to the church hall in the middle of the night and clean up after a special event and have the hall cleaned and set up and ready to host an early morning party. You see, besides bingo, our church had various other groups and organizations. Despite my Uncle Will's denial, my grandfather claimed that he was an active member of every one. There was the Jolly Club, the Knights of Columbus, Sons of Italy, and the Leisure Club. The hall on the ground level underneath the church played host to so many amazing groups, filled with so many amazing people, and my grandfather knew and had a nickname for every one. He turned in early that evening, immediately after the conclusion of the game, and before I knew it, I saw my grandfather creeping into my room, shining his flashlight on the floor, trying not to wake my grandmother and Aunt Thelma, tiptoeing around like a cat burglar, scrounging for loot under the cover of darkness. Much to his surprise, I was already awake and just awaiting his arrival to tell me it was time. As I recall, he left the house around 2:30 a.m. I wasn't used to being awake at that hour, and it seemed rather strange that the house was so dark and so quiet, with the exception of hearing an occasional hum coming from the refrigerator. Grandpa turned off the living room light closest to the front door as we walked out and stood on the porch. He walked gently backwards through the threshold, pulling the door ever so softly as he pulled it closed, and made certain that it was locked. Walking to the car, I glanced around the dead silent street and gave a quick stare at all my neighbors' houses, knowing everyone was inside asleep except for us. due to the deafening silence blanketing the once busy but now motionless street. It gave the sensation that I stepped out of my house and into the beginning of a horror movie that I'm sure I have watched more than once. He pulled up into the church parking lot and parked right outside the front church doors. For some reason, I had butterflies in my stomach, almost if we were doing something wrong or if possibly we were being watched. Before exiting the car, my grandfather fumbled through the large set of church keys and had the main church door key on standby so we wouldn't have to waste time or make any unnecessary noise in entering the church. I was overtaken by the strange yet ominous feeling of anticipation. I realized that this is the last place on earth where I should have these feelings building up, but maybe it was all the stories I've heard and movies I've watched, or even better yet, I've never been alone in a church in the middle of the night. Either way, my mind was creating flashbacks of things I've seen on television. My grandfather locked and pulled open the main door, and as always, when we entered church, we dipped our finger in holy water and made the sign of the cross as we stood in the silent hallway. I opened the main doors for us to enter the church, and I was hypnotized for a brief moment of the beauty my eyes were perceiving. The red-cased candles shined so elegant and soft, glistening off the stained glass windows, and cast a glimmering shadow onto the statues, giving them the appearance of movement as if they were coming to life as we walked into the church. I'm not really sure what he was doing, but my grandfather was walking all through the church, checking on various things. As for me, I just stood there and looked around at how different our church was at night, despite my one time there when I served midnight mass on Christmas Eve. Standing there in total silence and solitude helped me to realize where the old saying, quiet as a church mouse, originated from. Because where I was standing, the silence absorbed my entire body. There were 2 different stairwells that led from the main floor down to the hall. Both led you out on either side of the main area of the hall. Once we had gotten down there, my grandfather went to the breaker box as I went to the kitchen to sneak a carton of chocolate milk that they served us at lunch. And just like that, the hall was lit up and it was time to work. Grandpop and I worked throughout the night, and before we knew it, we were putting the finishing touches on the now prepared hall for the party that would be starting in a few short hours. It was late in the night, or very early in the morning, depending on how you look at it, but regardless, it was still pitch dark outside and dead silent inside. I was standing 3/4 down in the hall close to the kitchen and the door that we would be leaving out of as my grandfather turned off most of the lights. I knew there was an old superstition that stated you shouldn't enter a door and exit through another, but in my case, my grandfather wanted to lock the main church doors and exit through the back of the hall. Now that everything was complete, it was time for him to start his ritual and go back through the entire church just to be certain that everything is the way it's supposed to be. As Grandpop left the hall by the way of the far end and proceeded up the stairs, I just stood there and looked around and imagined in my mind all the things that I have participated in that very hall. The indoor soccer games during youth group, the Christmas bazaar that us students get first crack at during school hours, and then the many tiresome hours we spent there rehearsing our theater group for the opening night of our dinner theater. Maybe this is why I always feel so relaxed yet excited whenever there is reason to be at school or church. Grandpop seemed to be taking even longer than normal, and I was running out of things to think about now that the fatigue was setting in. All I could think about was getting back into my bed and what else to do today on my day off from school. After Sunday morning breakfast, of course. A few more minutes passed, and I found myself still standing in the same spot, staring at the side entrance of the hall, waiting for my grandfather to return. Something was attracting my attention almost in my peripheral vision. across the hall at the other side entrance. For a split second, my mind informed me that it may have been my grandfather who could have come down the other back stairwell entrance. But as I slowly turned my head to get a full view, I was not prepared for what I saw standing right there at the entrance of the hall, staring at me. Standing on the second of two steps was what appeared to be an image of an elderly priest. He was tall and thin, yet I could not see his facial features. I say an image because the motionless figure appeared to be rather blurry, like not in full focus. But as sure as I was standing there, so was he. He donned a long white vestment, or even possibly some sort of robe. He just stood as if he was a statue, or even better yet, frozen in time. But one thing is for certain, he was staring right in my direction. His eyes were locked on me, but gave the impression like he was looking right through me, or maybe didn't realize I was even standing there, frozen as well. I can remember I wanted to run, or at least let out a yell, but it was as if all motor skills had gone paralyzed, and all I could do is stand there as still as possible and hold my breath, not to make a sound, and wait for my grandfather to come back. Moving just my eyes, I glanced over in the direction of the other stairwell, hoping to see my grandfather. But I did not see or hear him coming down the steps or making his way through the small hallway. Taking another deep breath, I slowly and cautiously wandered my eyes back toward the ghostly apparition, and all I saw was an empty vestibule. By this time, I was feeling a dry, burning sensation in my chest and taking breaths as if I just completed a short-distance sprint. But at the time of the vision, I was so stricken with fear that I didn't realize the changes that my body had instantly sustained. I continued to stand and stare at the exact spot where I just witnessed what I believed to be a spirit of possibly a priest, and didn't even realize that my grandfather had entered the hall and was already walking towards me. Grandpop had his eyes focused on me as he approached, and once he was close enough, he said, "Ernie, what's wrong?" I answered by saying, "Who else is here?" not realizing my voice was shaky and kind of breaking up. I was asked to repeat my question. Clearing my throat and taking a breath, I said in a calm manner as possible, "Who else is here?" My grandfather, in an almost rehearsed voice, responded, "Did you hear someone walking around upstairs?" Not knowing exactly sure how to explain, quick and simply, and in a convincing way, what I had witnessed, I simply said, "There was a man standing over there on the steps while you were gone. I didn't hear him, but when I looked over, it looked like a priest standing there staring at me, and then he was just gone." My grandfather, without taking his eyes off me, said, "Was he wearing white?" At this point, it felt as if everything inside my body had dropped to the floor. I started to regain that burning, dry sensation again, and a surreal feeling had taken over my body to that point where, at any moment, I would wake up or see my grandfather start to laugh and say this was still all a joke. Nothing of the kind occurred, and I was left standing there speechless, and once again frozen, and just staring. This time at my grandfather, not a ghost. Grandpop said, "Come on, let's go. I want to get back home before your grandmother wakes up." I got in the car and locked my door and felt somewhat at ease. But I knew something was going on that I didn't know about, and I was certain that my grandfather knew as well, but for some reason never told me anything, even prior to experiencing this for myself. I didn't say a word. I just remained silent as we drove out of the church lot and onto the quiet, softly lit street. My grandfather wasted no time as he tried to make sense of this for me in a way that I would understand and in a way that would not frighten me and make me nervous about going back into the church. Diving right into it, he informed me that several church parishioners have reported over a period of time seeing an older priest dressed in all white in several places throughout the church. The priest isn't rumored to say anything, but has just been seen standing and watching over things, almost as if he is standing guard. I had so many questions, and now that we were getting closer and closer to home, I was beginning to feel a bit brave, almost as if I survived some sort of trying event. A paranormal event, if you will. My questions to Grandpa were simple. Who is he? And why is he coming back? Out of all the questions circulating in my curious and now intrigued mind, I had to pick the two questions that he had no answer to. My grandfather basically assured me that if we in fact saw a spirit of a priest, he may just be there to check on things or to check on us. Either way, he told me there was no need to be afraid. He may not even know we are there. The most comforting thing that he relayed to me was that an elderly female parishioner saw the ghost priest and reported it to one of the priests at the church, and he told her that since the priest is being seen and is displaying white garb, that is a sign of peace and no harm is intended, that it should be viewed as an enlightened, peaceful, almost protected experience. The good part of this whole experience is that the sun was just starting to rise, because you know as well as I do that if this would have occurred on Friday night bingo cleanup, there would be no way I would be able to sleep when we arrived back home. I never spoke a word of this to anyone. Actually, my grandfather and I never even mentioned it again to each other. It was as if it never happened, but we both knew that it did. School continued on, and many days sitting in class, I often wondered about what I saw and wondered if he was there and could see us during class, or could Grandpa be correct? The vision of the priest that once was not even be aware of what was going on around him and just be continuing to live in his own realm. Attending a Catholic school that has now seen 3 generations of my family was very basic and something that you would imagine in your mind when you picture the old desks and a wall in the back of the room, which was considered a coat room, on the other side. There was no cafeteria, so every day we had to bring our lunch, but the thing we all looked forward to was that Sister Charles sold a variety of lunch-sized bags of chips and pretzel sticks. It wasn't much, but to us, this was a big deal. We had a half hour of recess every day, but there was no playground, no monkey bars or swings. We played in the back portion of the parking lot on the asphalt ground. Our 2 favorite things to do was to have races to see who was the fastest, or we played soccer. It seemed that every boy in my class loved soccer, even those who weren't really that good at it. For me, that was great because I came from a family of males who all played soccer growing up. Actually, my grandfather's brother John, who passed away when my grandfather was just a young boy, he caught pneumonia playing in a soccer game in the rain, and that is what led him to his death. The times back then was very different when it came to illnesses that in today's world we could cure in a matter of days. On rainy days, we would have recess in the church hall, as do our once-a-week gym class. As much as I loved recess and gym class, you know where my mind was, or should I say where my imagination was during our playtime in the hall. Whenever we were in there, I couldn't stop myself from constantly looking over at the steps to see if there was anyone standing there staring at us. In a somewhat way, I guess you could say that I almost hoped that I would see the ghost priest again. I mean, it was the middle of the day, and I was surrounded by all my friends. A much different atmosphere than the middle of the night in the dark and alone. No matter what, I always felt a warmness in my heart and a sense of peace whenever I was at school or church. As the Fridays came and went, we continued to work cleaning up after bingo, but for a period of time there was some extra work that needed to be done, so my grandfather hired one of my cousins to work with us. My cousin wasn't a child. He was like 10 or 11 years older than I was, so it was actually a big help for my grandfather. My cousin continued to work with us for several weeks. I loved being around him. He was that older cousin who in those days would be considered what you call cool. He didn't treat me like a little boy, and when no one was around, he would talk to me as if I was a teenager. He never said or did anything inappropriate, but he knew how to make you feel grown up on purpose without you knowing that he was in fact doing it on purpose. He was my cousin by marriage, but I always considered and referred to him as my cousin. He and my cousin that he was married to would occasionally take me and my two other cousins bowling, and then afterwards we would go to the local very popular Italian restaurant that I still frequent to this day. It was the place that everyone who was anyone would go after a nighttime school function or on a date or just a way to bring a weekend night to a close. No matter the case, I was hanging with teenagers and I loved it. One night during our work in the hall, I noticed my cousin had a very rapid change in his demeanor. He didn't really say much. There was nothing funny coming from his mouth, and that playful, childish attitude was now serious and somewhat preoccupied. I really never thought much about it. I just figured maybe he was tired and not feeling well, or maybe he was just in a serious mood because he wanted to get the work done and go home. Either way, I just continued my mopping because I didn't want to hold up my cousin and my grandfather. The next day, my grandfather and I were taking a trip to the city along the avenue to visit the owner of a very popular restaurant that has become a staple of Baltimore. For whatever reason, we were going there to pick up some pies that the owner's wife had baked for my grandparents. Maybe it was because my grandfather worked for the dairy and was a milk delivery man. He befriended this family who was once his customers. Every time we visited the restaurant during the weekend, there was always a line out the door and down the block of locals in their Sunday finest, waiting to go in to enjoy a meal. It's almost as if they were in line waiting to see the latest horror movie that had once taken the entire nation by storm. The funny thing is, the movie theater was only a block or two down the street, so of course every time we were near the movie theater and I see a line, I always remember of a day when we took my father to the movies. I remember approaching the restaurant and seeing all those people in line, and my grandfather and I bypassed everyone and went straight to the doors where the owner himself opened the doors and held them as we entered. He and my grandfather shook hands and shared a few laughs. I was always amazed by the glass pie shelf that turned in a circle so you could see all their delicious pies reflecting off the mirrors in the lighted display. We were only in the restaurant for a few minutes. My grandfather introduced me to everyone, including the locals that he knew from our church. By the time we were done saying hello to everyone, I felt dizzy because those pies must have felt turning inside that display case. We looked up to the car and started on our way back home, which couldn't come quick enough. I could smell the aroma of the freshly baked goods filling the car, including the chocolate eclair that the owner's wife handed me when no one was looking. Knowing my family, she had no doubt that I wouldn't have a problem accepting it. Just a few minutes into the ride, my grandfather said, "Oh yeah, your cousin won't be working with us anymore. He told me Friday night that he would not be coming back." Kind of puzzled, I turned my chocolate-covered face toward my grandfather and asked him why. My grandfather looked at me in a serious yet comforting way and said, "Ernie, he saw the priest." I felt an instant chill overtake my spine. It was even more excitement, I think, than anything. It was that eerie yet excitable feeling, like when you realize something scary is about to happen. I questioned my grandfather, but he didn't have a whole lot of answers. All he said was that while we were cleaning up Friday, my cousin caught a glimpse of what appeared to be an elderly priest, donning all white, and standing in the same exact spot that I told my grandfather that I had seen him. Due to the fact that we were the only 3 living souls in the entire building and we were completely locked in from the inside, it must have totally freaked my cousin out. I guess not everyone is intrigued and curious of the afterlife as I am. But either way, Friday night bingo is again back to just me and my grandfather for the time being. At this point, I couldn't wait for Friday to arrive. I was a young boy working with his grandfather, drinking free chocolate milk and earning 40 cold, hard cash to conduct an undercover ghost hunt. Friday night came and went, and nothing out of the ordinary really occurred other than knocks and creaks, until my grandfather told me that on the upcoming Saturday, we have to do another late night cleanup and set up to prepare for an early morning Sons of Italy celebration in the hall. Saturday came, and not much was on my mind except getting done so we could go home. It had been a while since I witnessed what I believe, and now my cousin believed to be an apparition of a priest of long ago. I was finishing up my mopping when my grandfather said, "Ernie, are you going to be all right? I have to go upstairs and make sure everything is locked and look for some signs in the closets that Father asked me to drag out." I felt a sudden sense of dread accompanied by a slight sense of fear, but I tried my best not to show it, because what kind of horror and supernatural enthusiast gets scared in a church? Not to mention, I didn't want my grandfather to think the things I watch and read contributed to my vivid imagination. My grandfather was taking much longer than I anticipated, and wouldn't you know, I began to hear distinct footsteps coming from the church above. Not to mention, it sounded as if the footsteps were pacing back and forth directly above me. Knowing the entire building as well as I did, it was obvious that the footsteps were continuously getting louder and louder, which could only mean one thing. They were getting closer and closer. I stood frozen. I don't think I could have even yelled if I had to. At this point, other than my own heartbeat, the only thing I heard was the footsteps coming down the back stairwell, which led directly to the steps where I witnessed my first ever spiritual apparition. The footsteps finally reached the bottom of the stairs, and I heard them come to rest on the top metal-covered step, which gave a distinct sound any time anyone ever stepped on them. Holding my head down toward the freshly mopped floor, my eyes very slowly began to descend upward towards the steps. This time it wasn't the priest, but whomever it was walking toward me. I began to walk backwards very slowly toward the kitchen, yet did not take my eyes off of this unidentified man who had somehow made it into a locked-down building. He aborted his approach towards me and stood very still as we locked eyes for a few seconds. Eventually he spoke and asked if Ernie was still upstairs. After a brief moment, I felt relief, but then I wondered, even if he knows my grandfather, how does he know he's upstairs? How did he get in here? Most importantly, why was he here at 3:30 a.m. in the morning? The only logical thing that I could think to say is he's on his way back down. The man replied, "Okay, I will see if I see him." The man looked at me and said, "Ernie, sorry if I startled you." I was speechless. If it was not 3:30 a.m. in the dark basement of a church that I now feel is being haunted by a mysterious priest, a normal person rationally would think, "Oh, okay, he must work here," or maybe it was a priest who lives in the rectory who is just dressed as a casual civilian, or at least, since he was dropping names, he had some sort of ties to my grandfather. All I know is my mind was racing faster than my heart, and when I saw my grandfather appear from the shadows of the dark hall, I started to run towards him. I immediately said, "Grandpa, there was a man in here." He replied it must have been Frank. I asked him who Frank was, and he said that Frank is just an older man who lives close by and comes to the church now and then and checks to make sure everything is okay and that nothing is going on or going wrong. Grandpa never said much after that except that everything is locked up and set up for the next event. We made our way out the back door of the hall, and my grandfather turned off the remaining light and pulled on the big double doors once they were closed to ensure that they were locked. I remember saying to him on the ride home, "How is Frank going to get out? Or are you sure the doors will be locked?" He replied that Frank was given his own keys. The priests know that he pops in from time to time. I guess this all made sense, but the funny thing is why my grandpop never mentioned Frank, and why have I never seen him or heard of him after all this time I've spent there? I'm not saying that Frank was a ghost, but something just didn't seem right at the time. Especially Frank just occasionally pops in. Wasn't my grandfather a bit leery that what happened tonight was bound to happen sooner or later, since on so many occasions that we were alone in there at all hours of the night? I would sit in school during the day and every now and then find myself drifting off thinking about the happenings at night and how different the church and school felt once everyone was gone and the entire building is locked. My classroom was on the top floor in the adjacent building to the church, and now I always had this feeling that there was more going on than school sessions, whether it was our realm or the realm of life that once was. Either way, any time that I could find an excuse to wander the silent corridors of the school or manage to get myself downstairs to the empty hall, I took it. The good thing was my grandfather's office was on the other side of the hall, so once in a while when something went wrong, the teacher would say, "Ernie, can you go down and find your grandfather?" To them, I was being considerate. To me, I was given permission to go investigate. Once again, I found myself doing my good deed and wandered the halls in search of my grandfather. I always took the longest and most complicated route in doing so. It gave me more time out of class and more time to snoop around. Eventually, I located him, and he would escort me back to my classroom, where we met in the hallway with my teacher, and eventually my friend and classmate Mark was instructed to step into the hallway where my grandfather and teacher both spoke with him. That evening, during our ritualistic Wednesday night spaghetti dinner, my grandfather said for the next few weeks, my friend Mark would be joining us for Friday night bingo cleanup. It was to my belief that Mark had gotten himself in some kind of trouble, and in lieu of suspension, this was like a makeshift community service. Either way, it didn't matter to me because now my friend Mark would be working with us, and I already knew how much fun that was going to be because of the shenanigans we pulled off during class, which most entirely ended up getting him on bingo night cleanup duty. Friday night arrived, and as we pulled up to the back entrance of the hall, Mark was sitting in his father's car awaiting our arrival. Mark's father told Grandpop he would come a few minutes early and will be waiting outside when we finished. The night went fairly quickly as expected. Mark and I shared many laughs and many stories, all involving our classmates. Even though we talked and joked about our friends, we were a tight-knit group and always stuck together and very much so enjoyed being together. The time of the evening arrived and my grandfather started his journey through the dark church to ensure that everything was in place and locked properly. Mark and I was standing in the middle of the dimly lit hall when a slight noise gained our attention. Mark and I both stopped mid-sentence and slightly glanced very slowly to each other. Without moving our heads, we let our eyes wander towards the steps where we could hear the noise. At this point, it was very clear that we both saw something standing on the step, which resulted in us running through the hall and up to the other set of side steps toward the church, where we knew my grandfather would be. Out of breath and trying to talk, we located my grandfather, who naturally suspected that we were just carrying on and running through the building. Mark managed to blurt out, "Mr. Ernie, there's someone down there." My grandfather replied, looking at both of us, "You probably saw Frank." I said no, it was the priest, and before I could utter another word, Mark said, "I saw him too. He was standing on the top step, wearing all black and staring at us." At this point, my forehead started sweating as an ice-cold sensation ran down my spine. You see, I had never mentioned to anyone at school about sighting the priest, and yes, just 2 minutes ago prior to our sprint through the building, I know Mark had seen something as well, and he just gave total confirmation to what it was that I saw too. I did see the same priest in the same exact spot, standing motionless as if he was staring at us or completely through us. And Mark was absolutely correct. He was dressed in all black. I'm not sure if this meant something or not, but in my mind, it most certainly did. This was the third known sighting that I am aware of, and only thing that kept running through my mind was that the priest assuring the parishioner that everything was fine because it simply could be a vision of peace and comfort, seeing a vision of a priest watching over you dressed in all white. The three of us eventually made our way back down to the hall. I could see the hesitation on Mark's face, and I could feel the anxiousness in my chest as we exited the back stairwell into the hall. Nothing was out of place, and the floor was almost dry, but I still couldn't escape the uneasy feeling of being watched as my ears continued to hum from the dead silence. A few days had passed, and Mark and I never once mentioned or spoke about our ghostly encounter. We were part of the cool kids and didn't see any reason to give our peers ammunition to be the jokes of the school's week. However, whenever the hall or something involved something unexplained was mentioned, Mark and I would secretly give one another that serious glance, knowing inside what we were hiding. Grandpop and I were out on one Saturday morning, and the subject of church came up because we were discussing some of the upcoming events that I was involved in after school. Out of nowhere, he said that Mark decided that he didn't want to work with us anymore and that he wasn't being forced to come back. Grandpop explained that whatever Mark had done to land him on cleanup duty was resolved, but I knew the real resolution of that story. So, guys, what did we think about tonight's reading? That was chapter 3. Tune in next week for chapter 4 and possibly 5. We'll see how the timing works out with the recording. I want to just say thank you to everyone for supporting the changes, and thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, sweet dreams. Bye-bye, guys.